So my name is Akane Freechild. I'm with Public Citizen and the Secure Our Vote Coalition. We are committed, as you can see from our website here, to paper ballots marked by hand or with an assistive device for every voter, and checking the results, auditing the election. And we are also committed to basic steps to secure the voter rolls and plan for hacks, because no system is perfectly secure. Plan for errors and hacks to make sure that everybody can vote on election day, even if they show up and, as has happened in Los Angeles and Maryland this year, they are no longer registered, even though they registered in advance. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Harris. Sorry, not Stephanie Harris, Stephanie Singer. Sorry, I was multitasking, which is never a good idea on these calls. She's an incredible leader. She's been an election official. She has a number of publications to her name, and I'm totally failing to find your bio that I sent you, Stephanie. So I totally failed on that one. But she's with Verified Voting. She observes and works on audits all over the country. And I would love for you to fill in what I missed, Stephanie. I apologize.
Okay, so thanks. I think that for this, the important thing to know about me is that I have a strong technical background. I'm a data scientist. I have a PhD in mathematics, and I served as an election official. I was on the Philadelphia County Board of Elections for 4 years. So, Kay, it's not good to know that Philadelphia is in the house. And I also want to say that I'm torn between being thrilled to hear so many old friends on the line and being thrilled to hear so many new voices of people I've never met who are getting involved in auditing of elections. So I just have a technical question. I can see on my screen the presenter view. Are you all seeing the presenter view? Or I guess it's a question for Akane.
We are.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slideshow view. Hold on.
While we're doing that, I can do the.
Okay, so if I've done this right, you should see the screen should say just show up.
Yep, it does.
Okay. All right, great. So yeah, I should say that I'm here on behalf of Verified Voting, which is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization advocating for legislation and regulation that promotes accuracy, transparency, and verifiability of elections. We believe the integrity and strength of our democracy relies on citizens' trust that each vote be counted as cast. Our primary concern lies in ensuring that the means for verifying election outcomes are in place and are used for that purpose. And we also focus on the reliability and security of voting systems. So there's going to be some technical stuff in this talk. There's a lot to know about audits. There's a lot to know about elections. And I want to say, especially to the people who are new to this, the first step is just show up. Really, just show up. This is, if you want to make a strong difference for elections in America, it doesn't happen at one election. It happens at one election after another election, after another election, after another election. So if at any point you find yourself tuning out and saying, oh my God, this seems just so complicated, don't despair. Just remember that the important thing is to show up. So thank you all for showing up tonight. This talk is also an advertisement for a guide that Verified Voting has just put out called Checking the Paper Record. And that guide is available online. And I hope that you all will find it useful. And I hope you all will, as you observe audits or read the guide, I hope that you will keep in touch with us at Verified Voting and let us know how it's going. Okay, so first question is, why audit? Well, elections are vulnerable. 99% of America's votes are counted by computer. But the good news is that we can do something about it. We can defend elections by voting on paper ballots and then looking after each election at statistical samples of voter marked paper ballots and comparing that to the computer results. So, so don't despair. And you can help. You're an important part of the process, the public. So the first thing you want to know is who audits elections in your town. So I took a town, I just picked it at random. You can actually do this on the internet. You can find random towns. Benton Harbor, Michigan. So suppose you live in Benton Harbor, Michigan. You can just search Benton Harbor, Michigan elections in your favorite web search engine, and you will probably very soon, one of the top hits will probably be the elections agency. So, you know, in some places, in most places in the US, it's the county that runs the elections, but not everywhere. So, and then if you look a little further down the page, you will find the name and the contact information of the person who is in charge of elections in your jurisdiction. And this is a very important person. So in Benton Harbor, Michigan, turns out is in Berrien County, and the elections administrator is Sarah Kirby. Okay, so that is, by the way, I couldn't find a picture of Sarah Kirby, so I put a picture of myself there. And I really just want to stress that whoever it is who runs elections in your town is a real person, probably with a family that they love. They probably put their pants on one leg at a time. And it is very, very helpful to remember that. The person who runs elections in your jurisdiction is probably under an enormous amount of pressure right now. This person may have started their career when elections were not quite so technology dependent, not quite so computer dependent. And this person is very likely someone who is really dedicated to free and fair elections and is under a lot of pressure from various sources. So, so building a relationship with this person is very important. And I wanted to give you a little bit of my philosophy of how to ask hard questions of an election official. So you're going to see stuff if you watch elections. You are probably going to see stuff that doesn't make sense to you, and it's very important to kind of to ramp up in the appropriate way. The first thing to know is that elections always have anomalies, and usually those anomalies are innocuous. Usually they are not really a problem. Or not a significant problem. So I would urge you, if you have not done election observation before, walk, don't run, and be polite. And remember that there is another election coming next year or the year after. And this is really a long-term game. So the first time you do it, you may not do much more than observe and learn a lot. Now, if you have a hard question, you really need to ask of your election official, why is this thing being done in this way? You know, why can't we observe the pulling of the ballots? How are the ballots held secure between the election and the audit? I mean, these are hard questions. You really want to get your facts in line. You want to find the relevant law and the history and the context and the facts, and you want to ask the hard question and still be polite. And then finally, if you really are in a position where you need to press, where you have asked and you have not gotten an answer and you need to really start pushing, then again, you're going to double check all your facts and history and context. Just to give you an idea, the Pennsylvania election code was written in 1937. And when I was on the Board of Elections, I used to read it all the time. And I used to all the time find things that seemed pretty plain English, like absentee ballots should be counted at the polling place. And then you would find out that because of some court case, 20 years ago, it was actually legal for the County of Philadelphia to count their absentee ballots back at the county board, not at the polling place. So the law is tricky. The history is complicated. The context is wide. Don't let that stop you from asking the hard question, but you really want to really line things up. And then if you really need to push back, you want to understand your recourse, which may be legal recourse, maybe a PR recourse, bringing the media in. And again, I would urge you, make the ask and outline the consequences to your election official in a one-on-one conversation. That's much more constructive than making a scene. Now, sometimes making a scene is appropriate, but only after everything else has been exhausted. And once again, I forgot to write it here, but the fourth point is be polite. Always be polite.
I have a poll whenever.
Yes.
So for those of you who are on the webinar, you should see a window pop up and you should be able to pick, do you know who audits elections in your town? And we're just kind of curious what the knowledge base is of the folks on the phone and on the webinar. And if you don't know, you can say other as well. Or you can look it up while we're on or later and find out. Give people another 15 seconds. Okay.
Okay, great.
Results. Most people have a county clerk or a registrar. But a lot of people have different their audits. Might be in Colorado, or it might be in different places, a different person. So it's good to find out. And then we have another follow-up question, which you should see now. How did the person who runs your elections get that job? Also really important to holding them accountable, or supporting them if they need more funding to do a better audit or whatever it is that you want to accomplish locally. Stephanie, you can see this too, right?
Yes, I can. And I think it's great how many people know the answer to this question.
I think it's great that we have a 70% participation rate as well. All right.
Okay.
One more. Okay. Sharing the results. Most folks have an elected person in charge of their elections, which is great for accountability. Okay,
so the next thing you want to know is what kinds of audits are done in your jurisdiction. And if you don't know already, the easiest way is just, here's a little script for you. Just call that election administrator and say, hi, my name is Stephanie. I live in Benton Harbor, and I'm wondering what post-election audits are done in Berrien County, and I'm interested in observing. How does that work? And again, you know, the bottom line is just show up. And if you have questions, please get in touch with Verified Voting, either on Twitter or Facebook or by email. Okay, Akani, do you want to stop for questions now?
Yeah, if you have a question, because we have 50 folks on the phone, I think it's probably better to put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will answer as many as we can. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll open up for verbal questions, just so I don't have to go back and mute everybody.
Okay, so there's a question that came in over the Q&A box, reminding me to mention that there are different kinds of audits. So what I'm what I'm talking about today and what the guide from Verified Voting talks about is auditing the tabulation. That's the process where the votes, the voter intent is interpreted from the ballots, and that intent is rolled up into election results. There's all kinds of there are process audits. There are audits of ballot custody. Voter registration is a whole other can of worms. So thank you for that reminder. There are lots of different kinds of audits. Okay. All right, I'm going to continue. So the first thing, once you know what kinds of audits, and maybe even before, you're going to want to assemble your team. First of all, you're going to want a spokesperson. And by the way, I've used real pictures of people I know who would be really great at these jobs. So you want someone who can be diplomatic but firm, and cheerful, and will be the one person from your team who will interact with the election official, because that kind of consistency really pays off when you're building a relationship. Then it's very useful to have someone who's a data wrangler, someone who can handle an Excel spreadsheet, maybe someone from computers, has some computer experience, some math, some statistics experience, and is comfortable with data. Then you also want to have, and this person might not come with you, but it's really helpful to have a statistical advisor, someone who is really a professional in statistics, who can help you understand the algorithms and what issues arise from statistics. So that's an ideal team to have. And of course, you are on the team, and you are observing. And I want to say again and again, this is an ideal. Just show up. Just showing up is fantastic. But one day when you're doing a real full-fledged, complete audit oversight, you will have all of these skills on your team. Okay. So I wanted to tell you about some things to watch for, things that typically come up. One is that for an audit to really be a meaningful beginning to end audit of the tabulation, you have to be in the paper in the auditor's hand has to be the paper that was in the voter's hand. Anything else it opens up a possibility of, if you're auditing from something else like an image, a digital image of a paper ballot, that opens up the possibility that image was somehow tampered with. So while it can be useful to look at other parts of the process and to dive into the process, and it really, unless the auditors are looking at paper that was in the voter's hand, you really are not doing a full audit of the tabulation. That's the only the paper that was in the voter's hand can be trusted evidence of the voter's intent. So fax ballots, no, they're no good for auditing. Emailed ballots, no good. Smartphone ballots, no good. Remade ballots, so these are a little trickier. This is, suppose you mail your absentee ballot in, and in the post office somehow it gets crumpled up and it arrives at the Board of Elections, and it's too crumpled to go through the scanner. So I think we have a poll on this, don't we? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So the question is, so what the Board of Elections will typically do is they will create what's called a remade ballot, which is they just take a fresh ballot, and some staffer at the Board of Elections copies the voter marks from the crumpled ballot onto the remade ballot. And the question is, if we're auditing, which one of those should we audit? Or should we audit both of them?
Okay, last chance to vote.
Okay, this is very exciting. The answer is actually the crumpled ballot. I mean, there's no harm in looking at both of them, but really you want the piece of paper that was in the voter's hand, and that's that crumpled ballot. And anything in between, including the remade ballot, is an artifact of the process of the election, and it is not a trusted source of voter intent. So thank you for that. Okay, okay. All right, another thing that is worth keeping your eye on is the scientific random sample. So any kind of audit that looks just at a sample rather than at every last ballot, meaning anything that's not a recount but is a statistical audit, it starts with a random choosing of ballots to be looked at, or maybe choosing of precincts or choosing of scanners. There's some randomness in it. And it is crucial that this starts with an observable random process, something like dice or cards or those pinball, sorry, not pinball, you know, those ping pong ball machines that they use for the lottery. And I think we have a poll here, Akini.
We sure do.
Okay.
Is it okay to use Excel's random function to choose the random ballots? Yes or no? Most people said no.
All right, that's excellent. Yeah, I mean, in fact, it is not okay to use Excel. The whole point of the audit is that well, there are a lot of different points of the audit, but one of them is that you're protecting against error or even deliberate hacking of computer systems. And if the Board of Elections uses Excel to choose the random ballots, then you're stuck with the problem of wondering whether the Excel or the computer on which the Excel spreadsheet was kept was subject to any kind of compromise. So the answer is no, it is not okay to choose Excel. Okay. All right, another thing to watch out for is whether you can observe the ballots being pulled. So the once there's a list of randomly selected ballots, it's going to say something like, you know, take the 17th ballot from from batch number 3 on scanner number 1, and in order to make sure that the audit is actually being protected from a rogue insider, you have to be able to see that the correct batch was chosen and people counted down actually to ballot number 17. So this is something to watch out for. I also want to say again that this process, maybe I haven't said exactly this already, but this process of risk limiting audits is a fairly new process within the last decade, and a lot of boards of elections are not quite there yet. I would say most of them, and that's okay. I think of this my fondest hope is that by 2024 we have really good, strong audits all over the country, everywhere, and everyone voting on paper. So boards of elections are still sometimes figuring out how to do this. So it may be that something like the pulling of the ballots won't be visible. You won't have access to it the first time you observe. I would urge you to, unless and until you get really hard evidence to the contrary, I would urge you to really work in partnership with the election official and not to ask, why didn't you let us see the pulling of the ballots, but rather to ask, how do we get to a place where the pulling of the ballots can also be observed? Because that will build confidence in the results. Okay. And we have a poll. Do we have, Katie, do we have a new poll? Oh, yeah. Okay.
This is relevant to the thing that you're about to describe. It seems a little random to folks.
Yeah.
I'm curious what kind of election jurisdiction you live in, because it's going to impact the data that you're looking at. So the options for folks on the phone are over 1 million people, between 1 million to 50,000 people, less than 50,000 people, or another size or type of jurisdiction. For example, Louisiana, they have parishes. Some folks, their jurisdiction is more a municipality as opposed to a county. Okay. And most people live in a mid-sized county.
Okay. So the reason we ask this question is that your election administration will look very different depending on what kind of county you're in. Most of the counties, most of the election jurisdictions in this country are small. And just things look different, and that's something to keep in mind. So another thing to look out for is the data that is posted about the audit. And ideally, this will be posted in real time on the web. And it will include, for a complete list, depending on the type of audit you're doing, your election jurisdiction is doing, you can look at the checking the paper record guide. But some important examples are the Ballot Manifest, which is really essentially a list of all of the pieces of paper from this election that have anything to do with a ballot, that are a ballot or part of a ballot. And another thing that often comes up if you're doing what's called a comparison audit is cast vote records. Okay. Okay, so again, I wanted to remind people, just show up. If you don't want to know the difference between a ballot polling and a ballot comparison audit, that's fine. Really, when you show up, it is, it's just, you're really defending democracy at home. And don't ever feel bad about just showing up and watching and keeping your eyes open. Okay, so I have a question from about ballot marking devices. Ballot marking devices arguably, this is the question, arguably violate the paper ballot from the voter's hand standard in practice per Philip Stark's comments and HCI results. If there are a large enough number of ballot marking device marked ballots, doesn't that undermine any audit? So for people who don't know, a ballot marking device is generally a computer device that is used to make paper ballot voting accessible to people with certain kinds of handicaps, in particular for the blind. And this is one of those points in elections where there are different things that we want from elections, and sometimes we can't have all of them. So for the being absolutely 100% sure that the paper record was verified by the voter, really the best thing is for a voter to mark it by hand with a pen or pencil, because you always are verifying as you are marking. But another thing that we want for elections is that we want elections to be accessible. accessible to people who can't see as well as to people who can see. And we want the ballots of people who can't see to be indistinguishable from those of people who can see, to protect the privacy of those voters. And the compromise that many people in the election integrity community have landed on is to allow ballot marking devices, these computers that aid in the marking of the device, as long as the voter can actually verify independently that the piece of paper that comes out of that ballot marking device reflects their actual choices. So ballot marking devices can be okay, but they do raise issues, and one needs to be careful about them. But I would not go so far as to say that they undermine an audit. They don't undermine an audit, but they do raise issues. So a question was, where can we find a copy of the guide checking the paper record? You can find it on the Verified Voting website, which is verifiedvoting.org. And I think we will have a link to it later. Actually, let me, Akani, what's the best way to get?
So everyone who registered for the webinar will get an email tomorrow, and the first link in the email will be to the reports. And then there'll be a bunch of other really awesome links that Stephanie put together to help you learn more about audits if you're interested. And I'll also put it in the chat shortly.
Great, thank you. There are a couple other questions that were asked, but I wasn't quite sure what the question was. So if you've asked a question in the Q&A and you haven't gotten your answer, if you could ask it again, I would appreciate that. All right, let's move on. So I wanted to show you a couple ballot manifests, what they might look like. So these are an essential part of any audit and one of the things that you should have your eye out for. So ballot manifest is essentially a count it's a catalog of all of the ballots or ballot cards. If you have a ballot that runs to more than one piece of paper, that's sometimes called a ballot sheet or a ballot card. And the basis for the audit is selecting these at random. So you are going to want to get your hands on the ballot manifest. And I wanted to give you a sample of what this looks like. So for instance, in Orange County, California, where they have 1.5 million registered voters in a countywide election, they did a pilot RLA this year. And their ballot was ran to several ballot cards. Some of them did, it's complicated. But there were about 1.5 million pieces of paper in the warehouse. And
RLA, just to interject, she means a risk limiting audit.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, they did a pilot of a risk limiting audit, which is the real state of the art, generally most efficient kind of audit to do. So their ballot manifest was in an Excel file, and it had 7,000 lines. And the lines were something like what I've shown you. I haven't shown you all 7,000, but they would say, the first line, it says that in the batches, they have a scanner that they call 1/1, and the first batch from that scanner had 195 cards in it. So that's what a ballot manifest might look like in a large county for a large election. Okay. In a small county like Inyo County, California, where they have, and where they also did a risk limiting audit pilot this year, they did it, the county has 10,000 registered voters. They did it in a special election, which wasn't even countywide. And at they had about 1,000 pieces of paper. So now what I've shown you here is the entire Ballot Manifest for Inyo County, California for that election. And it's in a different format, but the basic idea is the same. They have a scanner that they call Scanner 102, and the third batch that they scanned on that scanner had 6 pieces of paper. All right, so a ballot manifest, they can look very different, and just because of when you have 1.5 million pieces of paper, that's really different from having 1,000 pieces of paper. And I wanted to end on a slide that tells you a little bit about risk limiting audits. The idea of a risk limiting audit is that after you conduct the election and you have the paper ballots cataloged, you choose some contests to be audited, and you select a scientific random sample of the ballots for hand auditing. And then you look at that random sample. And the thing about a risk limiting audit is that once you've looked at that first sample of ballots, you say, does this give us enough evidence that the outcome of the election was correct? And, maybe it does. In all the ones that I've observed, well, sorry, I should back up. Not in all of them, but in almost all the ones I've observed, the first round was fine. And at the end of the first round, you were like, yeah, this election was fine. But, maybe you found some discrepancies. Maybe you found a couple ballots maybe you aren't sure after the first round. If you're not sure enough, then you go back and you pull some more ballots, and you keep on doing that until you're sure, or until you have enough evidence from these ballots you've looked at to say, we should do a hand count and we need to recount this election. There might have been something wrong with the count. We need to recount it. So this idea that you have some standard of evidence, we want to be sure to a certain, we want to have a certain amount of certainty that, and a certain amount of statistical evidence that tells us that, yes, we can trust the outcome of this election. That's really the point of a risk limiting audit. And by outcome, I should say, I mean not the exact vote total, because honestly, you don't care that much if the vote total is off, as long as you put the right person in office. So the mathematics behind the risk limiting audit, the engineering behind the risk limiting audit, is to figure out statistically what's the fewest number of ballots you can pull and look at, and get yourself the certainty you want that you're not going to put the wrong person in office. Or I should say, for the specialists listening, I will say that a different and slightly more correct way, or I should say a correct way, which is you want to have a good statistical certainty, something like 90% or 95%, that if the original count would have put the wrong person in office, that you will catch that and you will be able to reverse it. That's what a risk limiting audit is. And again, you'll have these slides available. So finally, I just want to end by saying again, there's a lot to know. And when you look at this guide, you will see it's a pretty technical guide for checking the paper record. And I just want to remind everybody, please, just show up. Every time you show up to observe an election, or you show up to work as a poll worker, you are really helping us defend elections and really protecting the country. So I'm really grateful again that you all showed up tonight. And Verified Voting will want to know how it went or how it's going. Please do keep in touch with us, either by Twitter or Facebook, or by email our good ways. And there are a few more questions have come in.
Before we do questions, can I do one more poll to see where people are at in terms of what they want to do for this election year?
Please, please.
Then we'll do questions, and I think we might have time to open it up. We'll see. One more poll. What are you planning to do for the election this year? Has this gotten you to the point where you're ready to observe and audit? We hope so, but if not, any of these steps would be great. And if you need help making a plan, you can email us at info@secureavote.us, and we will see if we can help you make that plan. And I'll put that email address in the chat as well for folks who didn't get it. It's info@secureavote.us. And of course, there are states that have no audits at all. 9 states that don't have any audits, even though they have paper, and then a number of other states who don't have paper ballots: South Carolina, Georgia, most of New Jersey, big parts of Texas. So there's lots of work to do there too, and we need your help, and it helps to be a poll worker and make friends with your election officials to do that. All right. Polling results. 84% of folks are planning to vote. Then lots of folks, 31% are planning to observe on the front end. 28% still working on their plan. 22% are observing a post-election audit. That's awesome. That's a great response. And if others are interested, please email Verify Voting or info@secureavote.us. And if you have an audit that you can observe and you're not able to reach anybody, we'll see if we can be helpful. No promises. But these are the results for folks. I'm guessing that the folks who didn't say they would vote can't vote because they're on the phone. All right, so let's go to questions. Let's answer the ones that we've gotten on the Q&A, and then if we have time, we'll open it up.
Yeah, so, all right, so here's a question. Would we be concerned about Excel ballot manifests being compromised? I love this question. Yes. So, in general, and even if it's just a list typed in a computer file, which is probably what it will be, what you want to be sure of is that the ballot manifest has been confirmed by examination of the physical ballots. And one of the ways that this is done, so imagine that they keep it on an Excel spreadsheet. It should be printed out. It can be printed out, and you can confirm in a lot of cases, depending on your voting technology, you can confirm that that the batch sizes are correct by weighing. And when I say you, I mean the staff of the election office observed by you. So that's an important part of the process of observing how the ballot manifest is created, and that it is confirmed. It's not just printed out from the voting system, but it's either created or the voting system ballot manifest is confirmed by actually counting or weighing or in some way assessing how many ballots are in each batch. And that's a big job. I mean, think about that for 1.5 million pieces of paper. Okay, think about that. That's a big job. It's a really important step, and it's a step that it's a big job. It's a really important step. So thank you so much for that question. Okay, what percentage of ballots are typically selected in a risk limiting audit? That's the next question. The percentage of ballots is going to depend on how big the county is. One of the interesting things about risk limiting audit algorithms is that the percentage of the number of ballots generally depends on the percentage margin of the contest and the number of ballots. Sorry, let me say that a different way. It generally depends on what's called the diluted margin, which is the difference in the votes for the candidates divided by the number of ballots cast in the county. And this means, by the way, that risk limiting audits are much more attractive to large counties than to small counties. I mean, if you have only 1,000 pieces of paper, it's not that hard to recount 1,000 pieces of paper by hand. But if you have 1.5 million pieces of paper, it's a huge job to recount them by hand. So, it's going to depend on the margins and on how sure you want to be that your audit process will catch bad outcomes. Okay. Next question. Does a good audit require that all races issues on a ballot are audited? So I would say no, but it does require that no one should know in advance which races or issues will be audited. As long as you say choose those randomly in a way that before you start the audit, until you start the audit, no one could predict that a certain race or issue would be kept out of the audit. Then you're okay. So you don't actually have to audit all the races and issues on a ballot. On the other hand, in risk limiting audits, part of the biggest, most time consuming part of the work is pulling the random sample of ballots. And so it often makes sense to, once you have the ballot there, why not audit all the races that are on it? Okay. All right, question, another question. So far, RLAs seem to rely on having paper ballots to pull. What about jurisdictions where there aren't any paper ballots? Well, you're, up the creek without a paddle if you have no paper ballots. If you have no paper ballots, you have no trustworthy evidence of the voter's intent. There is nothing to audit. Okay, next question. How does an audit end up reversing an election? So this is, this depends on state law. So there are very few, if any, states that have a law that says the audit will reverse the election. However, in practice, if an audit is done before the finalization of the results, which is usually called the certification of results, then any candidate who lost in the original count but has evidence from the audit that the count might not be right, it's up to that candidate. Generally, that candidate will have the right to challenge on that basis. I don't know of recent examples. Oh, sorry. I think, yes, there are examples of audits changing. Yes, there are examples, but I don't have one in mind of audits that have changed the outcome of elections. Okay, how is the sample size for a risk limiting audit determined? That is a pretty sophisticated statistical question, and you will, if you look at some of the references that you'll be getting in your email tomorrow, you will find literature on that, and it depends on the type of audit and on the standard of certainty that you're looking for. Okay. Okay, here's a question. Is it necessary to verify the entire manifest? Could it be randomly audited instead? That is a good question, and I do not know the answer off the top of my head. My guess is that if you introduce some randomness into the audit of the manifest, that you are going to need to take account of that, and at the very least it will increase the size of the sample, but I'm not sure. Okay, finally, and then the last question, not the last question, but it's 5:59, Akani, so what should I do?
Are you okay with staying on a little bit longer to answer questions? And I think there's a couple people who have their hands raised in the queue also.
Yes, I'm happy to stay on.
So if folks want to drop off, we're at time. We certainly want to respect your time. You're welcome to drop off, but we always try to answer as many questions as we can. We'll definitely be done at 9:15 at the latest, just to respect Stephanie's time. but we'd like to try to get to as many of these as we can. And there's also one in the chat from Richard when you get to the queue.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so why don't we move to the chat and the queue questions? There are two questions in the question answer that are a little technical, and I'm going to try to answer that privately to the people who asked them.
Okay, so my election official says that though we use electronic ballots, they never touch a network, so that ensures security. How do we respond to that?
Yeah, so there. Yeah, that's.
I feel that too.
Yeah, why don't you take that one?
So the problem, what gets hacked in voting machines is the software. So does the machine run software? Yes, it gets programmed every election. Well, how does it get programmed? You load the program onto the machine. Well, who programs it? A vendor usually. Is that vendor totally immune from hacking? Never. There's no such thing. So as long as there's software, there's an opportunity for there to be a computer error and a hack. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference on the receiving end. But there have been vendors that were hacked already. VR Systems in Florida was hacked. And often hacks are detected years later. One of the big scandals in the last year has been around remote access software being in some older ES&S systems. Symantec, which is of all the companies that ought to know about viruses, was the company that was hacked in that case, and they didn't come clean for years that their remote access software that is in some of our voting systems in 300 jurisdictions at one point had been compromised by hackers. So if there's software, it can be hacked. Maybe it's harder if they're not online often or ever, which is good, but that doesn't mean that you don't need that paper record and you don't need to audit. Everybody, ultimately, we hope by 2020 will have a paper ballot, ideally, or at least a paper record that can be audited in the way that we're discussing on this call. And thanks for the question.
Yeah, and I would add a political answer to that question, which is that that's an answer that election officials there are election officials, look, have some empathy for the election officials who are not technically super sophisticated and who are given answers that make sense to them by the technically sophisticated people that they rely on, who are usually voting machine vendors. So you are probably not going to change your election official's mind on this point, because your election official has a long-standing relationship with the person they rely on for technical advice, and that's not you. So the question then politically becomes, who does your election official listen to, and how can you build awareness in a larger way in your community, and build a political movement to let your election official or whoever appointed that person know how much the people want paper records.
That's the best answer to that question I've heard thus far. And that's why we asked you who appointed or who is your election official accountable to, because those are the folks you have to organize. And that's what Secure Our Vote is about, is helping you organize those folks and build power. So if you have more questions about the organizing side of things, answer them here, but also sign up on secureourvote.us. So I'm going to unmute folks as I can. You can also raise your hands on the webinar software. Although I don't actually, one person, I'm sorry, you have your hand raised and I don't know how to answer that. But I'm going to unmute folks and just make sure that you don't, oh, here, Michael. Michael Byer, you have a question. Are you able to ask it?
No, I'm sorry. I just was testing to see if I could see who had their hand raised.
All right. Well, thanks. Anybody else have questions, or should we wrap this? And I'm trying to unmute some folks. I'm really sorry. I know there's folks even with expertise who might even be able to answer some of these questions who I can't unmute for some reason. I apologize. Richard, did you have another question? Richard?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I do, I emailed Stephanie earlier, and I found when I worked at the polling place that the ballots, there could be 2 or 3 cards to one ballot, and they are in a totally chaotic order in the boxes. Don't we need to somehow have the registrar do something a little bit more organized before we could even do the any risk limiting audit?
Typically, registrars are not able to reliably keep different cards from one ballot together, and the problem can be even worse with absentee ballots, where voters might send in one card but not the other of a ballot. Right. And the way that we have done this, for example, in Orange County, where this was an issue, is that we based the audit on the cards and not on the ballots. So instead of thinking of the ballot as the basic unit of the audit, you think of a ballot card as the basic unit. Now, the price you pay for this is that then instead of the number of ballots you need to look at, or the number of pieces of paper you need to look at, depends on the number of pieces of paper in the election. Right. So it does, like if you have a 2-card ballot and you do this, then you're going to be looking at twice as many ballots. So sorry, twice as many cards.
Right. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
We have a question from Luther Weeks. I don't know if he's able to speak now.
No, I just, is my microphone working?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Yeah, that wasn't earlier. Well, no, I didn't have a question.
Anybody else have a question? If not, thank you so much, Stephanie Singer, for, sorry, one more?
Yeah.
Well, what can you do when you are not allowed to count the paper ballots? Like here in Florida, that we have paper ballots, but it's against the law to count them.
So if then if you have a law in your state that is getting in the way, then you need to organize to change that law.
Yeah, but nobody does anything. I tell the candidates, I say, we cannot continue voting like this, having paper ballots all over the state, uniform paper ballots. That's
yes.
Chris gave us. But immediately the legislature, the Republicans, put a law that we cannot touch the paper ballot. So what are they good for?
Yeah. So in my life, I've found 2 different things effective in that kind of situation. And one is, when possible, to use the law and to bring a lawsuit. And the other is to build a political organization or contribute to the building of a political organization that has this as a major issue. There's
a lawsuit after the election?
I'm sorry, say again?
You can a lawsuit after the election? Because
well, it depends. So what kind of lawsuit you bring, depends.
Very big. I mean, they don't like to be so close. So the candidates feel timid about asking for a recount. The only recount is to go again to the tabulation of the voting machines, and that's it. So they have to take the result, even if the election has been stolen. We cannot look at the paper ballot.
Yeah, this is a real fight. It's a real fight, and it's a fight state by state. Another thing to do is to run for office or to back a candidate.
Because
and then you have, the point is that as a candidate, you have more rights.
No, None.
Yeah. Okay. So we are going to have to wrap up. Christina, your question is exactly why Secure Our Vote started, to help people organize. They are winning paper ballots county by county and state by state. It is taking a long time. It is not an easy fight. It's totally worth doing. So please, if you aren't already signed up at secureourvote.us, sign up there. We can continue the conversation. And thank you everyone for participating.